The ICU doors burst open just before midnight, the sharp smell of antiseptic mixing with panic as nurses rushed a stretcher down the corridor. Alina Carter lay motionless, her face pale, her breathing shallow, one hand protectively curled over her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant, she had collapsed alone in the vast silence of her mansion, discovered only when a housekeeper arrived and heard no response from inside. Monitors were connected within seconds, alarms screaming as doctors barked orders, fighting to stabilize a woman slipping dangerously close to the edge. Bright lights flooded the room as machines displayed unstable vitals. A doctor pressed firmly on her abdomen, his expression tightening. "Blood pressure is crashing," someone said. Another voice followed, urgent and controlled, warning that both mother and child were in serious danger. Nurses moved with practiced speed, yet their eyes betrayed fear. They knew who she was. Whispers spread through the ICU like sparks: Billionaire's wife, Carter Industries, the woman whose life looked perfect on magazine covers. One nurse stepped aside, phone in hand, dialing a number already memorized by the hospital staff. It rang endlessly. She tried again. Voicemail. Another nurse attempted a different number, then another, each call unanswered. Adrian Carter's name glowed on the screen before fading again into silence. The absence felt louder than the alarms. Someone muttered that he was overseas. Someone else shook their head, unconvinced. Time was slipping away, and consent for critical procedures might soon be needed. Alina stirred faintly, her lips trembling as if trying to form words that never came. Her fingers twitched, brushing her stomach, and a nurse gently held her hand, offering quiet reassurance she could not hear. The baby's heartbeat faltered on the monitor, spiking anxiety throughout the room. Doctors exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. Every second mattered now, and hesitation could cost 2 lives. Outside the ICU, the hallway filled with tense silence. Footsteps echoed, phones buzzed, and still no husband appeared. The wealth, the power, the name that opened every door meant nothing in this moment. Alina lay surrounded by professionals fighting desperately for her survival, yet utterly alone in the way that mattered most. As the lead doctor finally spoke, his voice was steady but grim, the reality settled heavily over everyone present. Her condition was critical. The pregnancy had triggered severe complications. They would do everything possible, but there were no guarantees. Somewhere far away, unanswered calls continued to ring, while a woman fought for breath and a child fought for life, abandoned in the darkest hour by the man who should have been there first. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly toward a new day, each second underscoring the cruelty of his absence. In that sterile room, surrounded by beeping machines and strained faces, the truth became painfully clear: love could not be bought, loyalty could not be demanded, and when life shattered without warning, money could not replace a missing heart when it was needed most. Before the cold glow of hospital lights and the shrill sound of monitors, Alina Carter's life looked flawless to the outside world. She was known as the elegant wife of Adrian Carter, a global billionaire whose name commanded respect in boardrooms and headlines alike. At charity galas, she stood beside him in perfectly tailored gowns, her smile calm and composed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. People admired her grace, her quiet strength, and the way she never sought attention, even while standing next to one of the most powerful men in the world. Many believed she lived a dream that other women could only envy. In the early years of their marriage, that dream had felt real. Adrian was attentive then, ambitious but affectionate, proud to introduce Alina as the woman who understood him better than anyone else. Their home, vast and luxurious, once echoed with laughter and shared plans for the future. Alina believed deeply in partnership, in standing beside her husband through pressure and success alike. When she discovered she was pregnant, she expected joy to strengthen what they already had. Instead, everything began to shift. Adrian's reaction was polite, controlled, but distant. He congratulated her, kissed her forehead, and returned to his phone within minutes. Days turned into weeks, and his presence grew thinner. Business trips multiplied, meetings stretched late into the night, and weekends were suddenly filled with obligations that never included her. Alina told herself it was stress, that men like Adrian carried the weight of entire empires on their shoulders. She convinced herself that patience was love in its truest form. As her body changed, her loneliness deepened. Adrian stopped noticing small things. He no longer asked how she felt in the mornings or whether the baby had kicked during the night. Conversations became transactional, brief exchanges about schedules and appearances. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all, leaving her alone in a house so large it felt empty despite its luxury. At dinners meant for two, she often ate alone, staring at the empty chair across from her. Rumors began to surface quietly at first, whispered among social circles that smiled politely to her face. A young woman seen beside Adrian at events overseas. A familiar name appearing too often in gossip columns. Alina heard these stories and felt the sting, but she never confronted him. She feared that asking questions would shatter what little connection remained. Silence, she believed, was safer than truth. The pregnancy, instead of being a source of shared excitement, became something she carried alone. Doctor's appointments were attended without him. Ultrasound images were placed carefully in drawers he never opened. Each night, Alina rested her hands on her stomach and spoke softly to her unborn child, promising love, stability, and protection, even as she felt her own strength fading. The emotional weight pressed heavily on her chest, manifesting in sleepless nights, loss of appetite, and constant exhaustion. Wealth covered everything like a beautiful curtain, hiding the cracks from public view. Expensive gifts arrived instead of apologies. Flowers replaced conversations. Alina accepted them with a polite smile, telling herself that marriages endured phases, that devotion meant endurance. She ignored the growing ache in her heart and the warning signs in her body, believing that loyalty required sacrifice. Slowly, the isolation weakened her. Emotionally drained and physically fragile, she moved through her days like a shadow of the woman she once was. The perfect life everyone admired was built on quiet neglect, and while the world saw luxury and privilege, Alina lived in silence, hoping love would return before it was too late. Thousands of miles away from the sterile chill of the hospital, Adrian Carter sat beneath warm island lights, the sound of waves crashing softly against a private shoreline. The air was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and live music drifting from a beachfront restaurant reserved exclusively for the resort's most elite guests. Adrian looked relaxed, almost carefree, dressed casually yet expensively, his phone lying face down on the table as if the world beyond this island did not exist. Beside him sat Serena Vale, radiant and confident, her presence commanding attention without effort. She leaned close as she laughed, her manicured hand resting on his arm with familiar ease. Their table overlooked the ocean, candles flickering as servers poured champagne into crystal glasses. Serena lifted hers, snapping a photo that captured the golden glow of sunset, the bubbles rising, and Adrian's faint smile in the background. Within moments, the image appeared online, tagged with a location known for excess and indulgence, time-stamped at the very hour Alina lay fighting for her life. Serena scrolled through her phone, amused, reading comments filled with admiration and envy. She smirked and made a quiet remark about how people were too dramatic about things that tied them down. Responsibilities, she said lightly, were overrated when life was meant to be enjoyed. Adrian chuckled, not disagreeing, his eyes never leaving her face. He did not mention his wife. He did not mention the child. The word family never surfaced at the table. His phone vibrated again, insistently this time. Serena glanced at it, noticing the repeated missed calls. "Important?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Adrian flipped the device over briefly, saw the name, and turned it face down once more. "It can wait," he replied, his voice calm, detached. He raised his glass again, choosing escape over responsibility with effortless ease. As the night deepened, they walked along the beach, barefoot in the sand, Serena laughing as waves brushed her ankles. Another photo appeared online, this one showing intertwined hands in moonlit water, a caption about freedom and living in the moment. Back home, nurses were running, doctors were shouting, and machines were warning of lives slipping away. The contrast was cruel, unforgiving. Serena's confidence grew with every step, believing she had won something priceless. She spoke of future trips, of places they would go once complications were no longer an issue. Adrian listened, nodding absently, as though the world he had left behind was already fading into irrelevance. Each unanswered call widened the distance between him and the reality he was refusing to face. While Alina's body fought to survive, Adrian chose pleasure over duty, laughter over fear, indulgence over love. In that moment, surrounded by luxury and temptation, he did not look like a husband or a father. He looked like a man running from consequences, unaware that every second of absence was carving a wound no amount of wealth would ever be able to heal. Alina's breaths came in shallow, uneven gasps, each one a battle that strained her weakened body. The machines beeped frantically, the rhythmic pulse of monitors clashing with the anxious murmurs of the medical team surrounding her. Nurses adjusted tubes, checked readings, and whispered reassurances she could barely hear, but the tension in the room was palpable. Her fingers twitched toward her stomach instinctively, her lips parting in a faint, barely audible whisper, "Please, stay safe, my baby," before she drifted again into a haze of weakness and pain. The baby's heartbeat fluctuated dangerously, each irregular spike sending the doctors into rapid motion. Dr. Lawson, the senior obstetrician, studied the monitors with grim intensity. "We need to prepare for an emergency procedure," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "The risk to both mother and child is high. We must act, but legally we require the husband's consent. Has anyone been able to reach Adrian Carter?" A nurse shook her head, her hands trembling as she showed the phone screen full of unanswered calls. The room grew colder in that moment. The absence of a man who should have been the first to arrive felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone present. The power, the fame, the billions, it was useless here. It could not breathe life back into the mother or protect the child inside her. Minutes stretched into eternity as phones buzzed insistently, yet each call ended the same way, ignored, unanswered. The team debated emergency protocols, weighing risks against urgency, but every decision was haunted by the question of Adrian's absence. The tension was nearly unbearable, a constant thrum of fear and disbelief. How could someone so powerful, so influential, be completely unreachable when the life of his wife and unborn child hung in the balance? Nurses exchanged glances that spoke louder than words, shock, anger, and a silent, almost accusatory disbelief at the man's callous neglect. The sound of the elevator arriving brought a new figure rushing into the ICU, Alina's mother. Her face was pale from fear, but her eyes blazed with fury the moment she saw her daughter's frail form. "Where is he?" she demanded, voice trembling with rage. "How could he not be here? She's dying, my granddaughter is in danger." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she took her daughter's hand in a grip that was both desperate and grounding. Her presence brought a surge of energy to the team, a maternal strength that seemed to battle the darkness pressing down on Alina's fragile body. Nurses stepped aside to let her closer, murmuring quietly about the injustice of a man so absent, so indifferent, when everything that mattered most was unfolding before him. Alina's lips parted again in a faint attempt at communication, her voice a whisper, "Mama, stay with me." Her mother leaned closer, kissing her forehead and whispering words of comfort, promising that she was not alone, that someone was fighting for both her and the baby. Doctors continued preparations for the procedure, their hands steady but hearts heavy. Each instruction, each adjustment of equipment, carried the weight of imminent danger. Alina drifted between consciousness and the haze of pain, and in those fleeting moments, her eyes flickered open, revealing a flicker of fear and of hope. The room held its collective breath as Dr. Lawson outlined the plan, emphasizing the delicate balance of survival. Nurses murmured to one another, astonished at the absence of a husband who commanded the loyalty of thousands yet could not answer a single call. The injustice was sharp, bitter, and unrelenting. Yet amid the chaos, a quiet determination took root. Here, in the sterile lights of the ICU, the team would fight for two lives, fueled not by power or wealth, but by skill, courage, and the unwavering strength of a mother's love. Every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of decision became a battle to bring Alina and her unborn child safely back from the edge, proving that when human life is at stake, absence and privilege mean nothing, and true heroism is measured not by influence, but by action in the face of desperation. The first whispers started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A nurse, shaken by the cruelty of the situation, sent an anonymous tip to a major tabloid. Within hours, the world knew what had been hidden behind the polished veneer of wealth and privilege. Social media erupted as news outlets posted urgent updates: billionaire husband nowhere to be found while pregnant wife in critical condition. Comments flooded in, expressing outrage, disbelief, and disgust. The image of Adrian Carter, the man whose name had symbolized power, influence, and untouchable success, began to shift from admiration to contempt. People were no longer interested in his wealth, they wanted to know why he had abandoned the woman who carried his child. Within the same day, paparazzi, tipped off by the breaking news, located Adrian on the luxury island getaway. He was there with Serena Vale, laughing, toasting champagne flutes beneath the golden sunset, completely unaware of the storm building back home. Flashing cameras caught every gesture, every carefree smile, every intimate touch between the billionaire and his mistress. When confronted by a reporter asking where he was while his wife was in critical condition, Adrian's face remained emotionless. He offered a brief, dismissive wave and muttered something about personal matters, his tone chillingly detached. The world watched in disbelief as the man who once commanded respect now appeared cold, uncaring, and shockingly indifferent. Serena, who had been radiating confidence just hours before, began to falter under the relentless attention. The smile that once seemed untouchable wavered as the camera flashes reflected a new reality: public opinion had turned sharply against her. Online platforms buzzed with condemnation, calling her names and accusing her of being complicit in a betrayal so blatant it felt cruel. Even her social media following seemed to shrink as fans deleted posts and voiced their disappointment. The glamour she had used as armor could not withstand the moral outrage that now swept across the digital world. Her laughter had vanished, replaced by the subtle unease of someone realizing that wealth and beauty could not shield her from scrutiny. News anchors dissected every detail, replaying the footage of Adrian's nonchalance, speculating on his motivations, and highlighting the stark contrast with Alina's dire condition. Headlines screamed, "Pregnant wife fights for life, billionaire husband parties with mistress, where's Adrian Carter?" A husband's absence sparks outrage, power and privilege can't hide neglect, Carter's scandal explodes. Across television screens and social media feeds, the truth no longer remained confined to whispers and gossip, it had reached every corner of the public consciousness. The exposure ignited conversations in offices, cafes, and homes. How could someone so powerful and wealthy abandon responsibility when it mattered most? How could a man ignore calls, warnings, and urgent pleas from the hospital while flaunting luxury in front of the world? Even those who had once admired Adrian for his business acumen were forced to confront the person beneath the empire. In the glare of public scrutiny, the carefully constructed illusion of Adrian Carter's life began to crumble. His money, his influence, and his image of perfection were powerless against the undeniable truth: he had failed in the most basic, human way. For the first time, the world saw Adrian as he truly was: flawed, selfish, and shockingly absent when it mattered most. The scandal spread like wildfire, and neither time nor wealth could erase the mark of betrayal now etched into public consciousness. While Alina fought silently in the ICU, her story had become a mirror to the world, exposing the dark gap between appearance and reality, and proving that truth, once revealed, has a power no fortune could ever contain. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within hours of the scandal breaking, Adrian Carter's carefully constructed world began to unravel. Investors who had once flocked to his deals now reconsidered their positions, uneasy about the headlines dominating social media feeds and news cycles. Board members exchanged tense calls, questioning the judgment and character of the man they had once hailed as infallible. Partners distanced themselves, canceling meetings and issuing cautious statements, their voices laced with concern over the reputational damage of being associated with someone publicly exposed for such callous behavior. The empire Adrian had spent years building, one deal after another, began to show cracks that no money could mend. The foundations of influence and power he had believed untouchable were suddenly fragile, shaken by the revelation of moral failure rather than financial miscalculation. Serena Vale, who had basked in the glow of public admiration for her beauty and charm, began to feel the weight of the backlash. The smiles and flattery that had once followed her seemed to evaporate overnight, replaced by judgment and disdain. Social media posts turned cruel, followers unfollowed in droves, and opinion pieces painted her as the seductress who had distracted a man from his most basic responsibilities. The glamour that had always shielded her confidence now felt brittle and hollow. For the first time, she realized that admiration built on others' misery was fleeting, and the woman beside her, Alina, was the one commanding true sympathy and respect from the world. Serena's laughter faded, her carefree posture stiffened, and doubt began to creep into the space that had always seemed so secure. Meanwhile, the focus returned to the hospital, where Alina lay recovering from the emergency surgery that had saved both her life and the life of her child. She was weak, her body fragile, but her mind was sharp, processing the reality of the situation with a clarity born from survival. The truth of Adrian's absence and betrayal hit her like a tidal wave. Every missed call, every ignored plea, every indulgent moment he had spent with Serena became painfully clear. The image of her husband, smiling across champagne glasses while she had been fighting for her very life, seared itself into her memory. Yet, instead of breaking under the weight of despair, something inside her hardened. The pain transformed into resolve, anger transmuted into strength. She realized that love should not mean tolerating betrayal, and endurance should not equate to weakness. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand, tears flowing freely, but Alina's gaze was steady. "I survived," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "And we will survive. He won't take this from us." Every word was a declaration, a crystallization of her will to protect her child and reclaim her life. Alina began to understand that her power was not measured in wealth or influence, but in resilience, in the ability to rise even when the world had turned cruel and unjust. The betrayal, the public humiliation, and the absence of her husband became fuel for her rebirth, igniting a fire that no money, no charm, and no empire could extinguish. Outside the hospital, Adrian's life continued to crumble. Press conferences revealed the financial repercussions of his neglect. Sponsors canceled contracts. News outlets detailed lawsuits, investor withdrawals, and the growing anger of a public who once admired him. Every attempt he made to repair his image seemed futile, as each gesture reminded the world of the man who had abandoned his pregnant wife when she needed him most. Serena, standing by his side, felt the sting of the spotlight shift entirely away from her. Her beauty no longer commanded admiration, it now symbolized complicity, selfish indulgence, and moral failure. The world was no longer in awe of their lifestyle, it was in judgment of their choices. Inside the hospital, Alina held her newborn in her arms, a small, miraculous life she had fought to protect. She realized that the betrayal she had endured, the pain she had suffered, and the absence of the man she had once trusted had led her to a revelation: survival was not just physical, it was moral, emotional, and spiritual. She had reclaimed her power through strength and clarity, while Adrian and Serena faced the consequences no fortune, no charm, and no influence could ever buy. In that moment, the scales of justice, invisible yet undeniable, had begun to balance themselves. The cries of a newborn filled the sterile room, sharp and insistent, cutting through the lingering tension like a spark in darkness. Alina's body trembled with exhaustion, sweat cooling on her forehead, but her eyes shone with relief and awe. The baby, tiny and fragile, had survived despite the premature arrival, and the first moments of life were now a miracle cradled in her arms. She gazed down, feeling the rapid beating of a heart she had fought so desperately to protect, and in that instant, the world outside, the betrayal, the abandonment, the public scandal, faded into insignificance. Her focus narrowed to this small life, a symbol of resilience, love, and the future she would fiercely guard. Adrian arrived hours later, his presence announced by hurried footsteps and the camera flashes that had followed him since the scandal erupted. He stepped into the room, face pale but composed, attempting an air of control that had long since slipped through his fingers. Alina's gaze lifted briefly, and in it, he saw nothing of the warmth or devotion he might have expected. The husband who had ignored her cries for help now found himself powerless, standing on the threshold of a life he could no longer influence. She did not reach for him, did not offer a word of forgiveness. She was done waiting for apologies that could never undo the betrayal. The mistress, Serena, was nowhere in sight. Rumors of her sudden disappearance spread through social media even as reporters crowded the corridors outside. Her absence only emphasized Adrian's isolation, stripping away the illusion of companionship and leaving him exposed. Cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing every detail of his despair, every furrowed brow, every failed attempt at reconciliation. For the first time, his wealth and influence could not shield him from judgment or consequence. Powerless, he faced a reality where money could not reverse the past, where indulgence and neglect had cost him what mattered most. Alina held her child tightly, the tiny heartbeat under her hands a reassurance she had fought to earn. Strength surged through her, born of survival and clarity. She realized that her life, her happiness, and her future no longer required Adrian. The betrayal that had once threatened to crush her had instead forged her into someone stronger, someone unyielding. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled, and outside the hospital, the world watched as a billionaire's empire of illusion crumbled in real time. Inside, Alina embraced the truth: she was free, her child was safe, and the man who had abandoned her could never undo what had been lost. In that quiet yet powerful moment, mother and child stood triumphant, while Adrian faced the irreversible consequences of absence, betrayal, and hubris. Months passed, and the world moved on, but for Alina, life had been profoundly reshaped. She had left the hospital fragile yet determined, carrying not only her child but a newfound resilience that no betrayal could diminish. The opulence of her previous life no longer defined her; instead, her focus was quiet, deliberate, and entirely on rebuilding a future for herself and her baby. Each day became a ritual of love and strength, feeding, rocking, and nurturing the small life she had fought so desperately to protect. Her home, once a palace of loneliness and silence, transformed into a sanctuary of warmth, laughter, and the gentle rhythm of motherhood. Alina learned to rely on her instincts, her courage, and the unwavering bond between her and her child, finding a peace that no wealth could have provided. Adrian, by contrast, remained ensconced in luxury, yet the emptiness was palpable. His business empire continued to operate, but every contract, every meeting, every headline reminded him of the man he had failed to be. Public opinion remained unforgiving, investors and partners cautious, and whispers of scandal lingered wherever his name appeared. Wealth had not protected him, influence had not shielded him. The lessons of absence and neglect were etched into every aspect of his life, leaving him with power but without the love and respect he had taken for granted. Serena faded into irrelevance, her brief moment of triumph forgotten amid the judgment of a world that no longer admired her. She became a footnote in a story that centered on strength, resilience, and the consequences of moral failure. Her allure could not compete with the reality of responsibility and consequence. Alina held her child one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. In that quiet, profound moment, she realized the truth she had always known: the moment Adrian chose absence over presence, betrayal over love, indulgence over responsibility, he had lost everything that truly mattered. Money, power, and status could never replace what he had abandoned. And in choosing to be gone, he had handed Alina a freedom and strength that no force on earth could take away.